Hey guys, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, let me make sure we are recording because I know a bunch of people, okay, we are, so we're good. Hopefully Zoom is feeling better today than the rest of social media. It has been quite a day. Okay, looks like a bunch of you guys are hopping on. Happy Monday. Well, this has been an unexpected start to the week, but hopefully you guys have been getting emails. I sent a team newsletter and it was like 8 hours later before it went out and I had sent a second one. So there's like all sorts of stuff in your inbox. Some people weren't getting the Make Room Monday emails though, which I think is like a server bounce back issue. So if you're not getting emails, contact customer service and just have them manually enter stuff again, because on days like this, when we have social media that just sort of like vanishes, email becomes like your most valuable tool. So anyway, you're cutting out. Melissa says she can't. Melissa, you're really fuzzy for me too. Can everyone else hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Yeah, Melissa, you're like freezing from what I can see. Maybe it's your internet. Okay. So we're going to talk about Australia tonight, which I'm so excited about. I think at some point we should also probably talk about what everybody does to run their business when social media goes away and is not an issue. This is something that we talked about when people were having lots of issues getting locked out of their accounts and people were getting like sort of booted out of their groups and things like that for extended periods of time. And so we talked a lot about this then, and that's been less of an issue. And I think today is a perfect example of when all of a sudden you can't post anywhere and you can't share anything, like how do you run your business? Do you do emails? Do you do text messages? Messenger wasn't even working today, so it's not even like you couldn't post, you couldn't even like message people. So anyway, so we need to talk about that again, I think, because there's creative ways to kind of get around that, but I think it's something that we should all sort of keep in mind, right, for our businesses, for sales, communicating as a team, all those things for when we need a backup. But we're going to talk about Australia tonight. So I do have you guys all muted currently. Feel free to unmute yourself. I want this to be very collaborative, and the goal of this is really to talk about sort of what we're doing to prepare as individuals and a team to grow into our next market. And some of you have been here since day one when we launched Canada. Some of you are newer, et cetera. So some of you kind of have experienced what that process looked like. And for others of you, this will be sort of like your first go at this type of expansion. And Australia is going to be unique, as we all know, because it's on the other side of the world. There is a huge time difference. There is a completely different season difference. And then just the launch itself, we learned a lot. I feel like I learned a lot from the Canadian launch, both good and bad. And hopefully that will be helpful as we kind of get prepared for this next phase. But this is a huge, huge opportunity. And the one thing that the Canadian market has shown us is that this is a huge opportunity, because the way that the Canadian market has grown has been so dramatic. It has vastly exceeded kind of what we had expected. You guys have felt that at times with like your inventory and, you know, just kind of your like substantial growth, right? And so we know that the Australian market is an incredibly high potential place. They are, as a culture, generally very active, very into health and wellness. Eco-friendly and sustainable clothing is a huge, huge thing in that market. So we have a lot of ways that we'll be able to position ourselves for success. But what I wanted for this call tonight was really to start talking about how are we making connections with people in Australia, assuming that you don't have, 50 friends that live there, whatever you have, kind of like pre-built connections. If you're kind of starting from scratch, like how are you making those connections? How are you introducing the brand? And kind of what conversations are you having, and sort of what sort of like work are you doing to, again, start laying the groundwork for something where we don't have an exact timeline, we don't have an exact date, we don't have a lot of information to share yet, but we want to start planting those seeds. And so what does that look like? So that's what I really wanted to start with as kind of our focus, is just to be sort of collaborative in that way, to sort of share kind of what we're doing, how are you finding people, how are you connecting with them, kind of what are you saying to them, what sort of feedback are you getting, what sort of engagement, and just have a collaboration about that. Does anybody want to start? Or I can tell you what I'm doing, but I don't want to talk the whole time.
Erin, can you share with us kind of like the do's and don'ts that you learned from the launch into Canada, like kind of a Cliff Notes version of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally what I would say is, having been, so I joined ZYIA in the US, obviously it was not a founding rep, but I was about 6 months or so into it, right? So it was pretty new when I joined with that. So the Canadian experience was similar in a lot of kind of the things that we sort of went through on that end as well. What I will say about it is anytime you are launching a new brand in a new place with like new exposure and all of the things that we've seen with importation and, customer service and warehouse and all of those things, that period of time where there's a lot of momentum, there's also a lot of stress and strain on the system, right? So you have to be prepared for it to be bumpy. I can tell you with 100% certainty that the Australian launch will have bumps to it, okay? The US one did. We had a lot of them. The Canadian one has had a lot of them. It gets better, but the initial launch, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of patience. And this will be no different, right? What will be unique about this, I think, is just the fact that we're going to be dealing with very different time zones, right? And launches on different days and launching probably different items at different times and all of that. It's going to add layers of complexity to the business. It's going to also open up a huge amount of opportunity for it. But it's going to be one of those things you're going to need to be prepared for it to be bumpy, right? And that's, I think, my biggest takeaway from it, right? I think the other thing that I learned more predominantly with the Canadian launch was, as it turns out, Canada and the US have like kind of different seasons also. You all have different style preferences than we generally tend to here in some ways. Some of the pieces that were such a huge hit in Canada were things that people in the US were kind of like, that's fine, it's okay, right? So that whole thing has been very interesting to me as well. And things that would sell out really quickly or seem to be in really high demand in Canada were not things that I had really considered. And frankly, I don't think ZYIA had really thought through like, oh, in certain parts of Canada, it's, winter for like 8 months or something, or like in Alaska. I don't know what it is, but it's really cold, right? And you need sweaters basically year round. You need sweatshirts, you need hats, you need jackets, right? All of these things, where all of our friends down in Texas are like, we need shorts for 9 months of the year, right? And so I think Australia is going to be the same, which is even more magnified because their seasons are opposite of ours, right? So you can wear a bra in any season, you can wear leggings and whatever in any season, but when they're in their like peak summer, we're going to be in like deep winter, right? And I live outside Boston, so it gets really cold here, right? So I'll be deep winter. But again, our friends down in like Texas and Florida, like even when it's deep winter for a bunch of us, it's still like 60 degrees there, right? So I think kind of navigating what that looks like, I think is tricky. And I expect that that's going to be something that's going to be a tricky thing. The other big thing with Canada that is also going to be an issue in Australia is the price point. And that is something that I think that you all have struggled with in certain markets. And it's been much more magnified than it was here in the US. And a lot of the kind of like messaging and positioning in the market that we had where we would say, oh, like, we're so much less than Lulu and like quality is still great. And like, you know, you can save all this money and blah, 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 and all these things works for us. That is not true for you, right? And I think in Australia, it'll be the same. They have said that the price point with the exchange rate will be similar, kind of comparable to what it is for you all in Canada. And so it's not going to be a discount brand at all, right? It's not discount quality, but it's not going to be cheap. So I think it's things like that. And I think those were just things that, you know, again, being sort of naive to an entirely different country's market, right? It's just, there will be things with Australia, I'm sure, that are different from the US and from Canada, right? And we just don't know what those are yet. But those were kind of my biggest things, is I think the assumption that like we were going to launch ZYIA in a new country and have it just be like ZYIA 2.0, I think, and maybe other people had more like foresight or more whatever than I did in that regard. I don't think so, but maybe. But I think that we've learned that that's not the case. And ZYIA Australia is not going to be ZYIA 3.0. It's going to be ZYIA Australia. And I think it's going to look and feel differently than ZYIA Canada does and then ZYIA US, right? And we'll all be part of the same brand. But I think the way that we position ourselves in the market and the way that we market ourselves will need to probably shift a little bit depending on what that all looks like, I think.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Mhm.
Okay, so when there started to be talk of Canada happening, like what was the window? I mean, this isn't going to determine what our window of time is, but just curious on the window of time that you guys had in order to kind of, you know, start planting seeds and making connections. Like, was it a bit of a wait? Like I'm finding, like, I don't know if I'm trigger happy and I'm just too excited. I'm making lots of connections and I'm planting a lot of seeds, but I've got people who are super interested and ready. And now I got to just keep stringing them along and trying to give them a little bit more to keep them excited and keep them there when I don't really have much to get, you know what I mean? Like, am I just getting a little too excited? Like,
no, I mean, it was a solid 6 months.
Okay, yeah.
It was a solid 6 months between, because they told us so the summit before you guys launched, you launched in January or whatever that year was. They announced Canada officially at that summit. There were already a huge group of Canadian girls that had come to that summit that had US addresses. And we were all kind of like, what are all these Canadians doing here? Like they had driven, there was like this big group of them and they had driven like 18 hours or something, I don't know, something crazy. Because at the summit, they always do like, oh, like who's the furthest away or whatever, which is actually like pretty fun. And it's like, who traveled 5 hours, who traveled 10 hours, and like they keep going and they keep going. And it was like, literally, it was like people have been traveling for like 24 hours. And it was this whole like crew that had come from Canada. And we were all like, huh? Oh. So what I will say about messaging people this early is, and again, I may be in the minority on this one. I'm sure I probably am. I did not come home from like, oh, we're going to have a Canadian business and immediately start working on my like Canadian business at all. I was kind of like, okay, cool. great, right? And they said at the time, like it was going to be a long time and there's going to be a long wait and whatever, right? So I didn't really come home with any sort of like, oh, I need to like get on this. What I have learned, again, in retrospect, is because there is such high potential and because we have grown so much now between the US and Canada since we last launched a country, I now know that there's 80,000 of us, right, that are a part of ZYIA that are like, oh, great, I want to have an Australia business too. And I'll tell you that there are a ton of ladies who sort of like skipped Canada from the US that were kind of like, oh, whatever, we'll see what happens. And now they're like, oh, I'm not missing Australia because I sort of like sat out on the Canada launch and I'm regretful of it because you guys have been so successful. So I personally, I mean, I have set up an Australia Instagram. I've been messaging people. I'm like full steam ahead doing all the things. What I have been doing is I personally, another thing that I learned in this, which is just general life lessons, I have a spreadsheet that I'm keeping now. Because what happened was I would like randomly have these conversations with people through social media and whatever. And, you know, in a 400 cold message, you know, Instagram feed or whatever, I would completely forget who I had talked to, right? And trying to go back and find them and whatever. So when I started messaging people, I set up an Excel spreadsheet and I have their name, their Instagram handle, where they are, and also some notes about them, because that was another thing. Like I'll have these conversations with people and in the midst of talking to all of you and all of my customers in my regular life and all of these other cold messages that I'm sending and all of these other things, I won't remember how on earth I found them, what they cared about, what they liked. Like it's completely gone for me. So I've been recording, like there's some people that I have messaged that have seen my message, haven't responded to my message, but have followed me. And so I'm like, well, they must be at least quasi interested, right? They at least like they followed me from that. So those are the kinds of things that I'll put in my notes, like, you know, didn't respond to message, but followed me. Or, you know, there's some people that have like asked to actually see the American site. And I've told them the Australian price point is going to be different with the exchange rate and blah, blah, blah. Just to make sure that, again, very transparently, people know what it is that they are looking at. And, you know, that they're going to start with a smaller catalog, a smaller, you know, all those things or whatever. But so I've been putting those notes. Or, you know, there's one lady who her whole thing is about eco-friendly, eco-sustainable type lifestyles. And I'm like, great. Like, obviously I really focused on our eco-friendly line when I was talking to her, right? I like heavily push that. So those are the kinds of things that I'm keeping in notes so that 6 months from now, when we launch, I can go back into that list and be like, oh, now I will send back, you know, some follow-up messages and be like, hey, you know, or once we have a date or things like that, right? So I'm not necessarily like, you know, peppering them with stuff, right? I know who they are now. I've got a list of them. I know that they exist. I know that they know we exist. And I can keep that information sort of like running. And then if something comes up where I'm like, ooh, now we know we have a launch date or we have, you know, more details or whatever, then I can circle back around and be like, hey, guess what? We like, you know, have this information to share or whatever. So that's
Hey, Erin.
kind of my process. Yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm late to the thing and you might have already touched on it or had a conversation about it. How did you verify whether they were actually in Australia or not?
I mean, by looking at their stuff.
Yeah, because sometimes like it can be confusing. So for example, like to try and reach other people on Instagram, I've tagged Australia or used hashtags, but I've actually had other ZYIA reps think I'm in Australia, or other like Monet reps think I'm in Australia because I'm trying to reach people in Australia and I'm actually not, or vice versa. So I've actually reached out. So is there a way that you like filtered those people? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I should say with my cold messaging, I spend a long time, I don't just like fire off stuff. I actually I go through people's stuff a little bit, and looking at a lot of things, like the quality of like what it is that they're posting, right? Do they look like somebody that would fit into like what it is that we do? And there are times where, yeah, it can be very hard to tell like where somebody is. And so I spend some time figuring that out. And if I can't figure it out, a lot of times I just kind of like move on. But most of the time, if you kind of go through and sort of like look in, people at some point will have like their gym tagged, or they'll have, you know, a beach tagged or whatever it is. I mean, it's no guarantee that they're there, but for the most part, I find I have not had any situations yet where I've messaged somebody and had them be like, oh yeah, no, I don't live here, right? I'm sure it'll happen at some point. I mean, I recently messaged somebody for the second time that was not an Australian person that I had messaged once in her stories, and then messaged her again, and she was like, oh, we've met, haha, like look up. And I was like, shit, sorry. It's been a while since I've done that actually. So, you know, I try to be the thing with cold messaging is it gets a bad rap. It can be really yucky, and it can be really yucky when it's not done well. If done well, I think it's a great tool. And I think for something like this, again, unless you just happen to have 1,000 Australian buddies that are like hanging out, I don't really know how else somebody in the US or Canada is going to connect to someone in Australia without cold messaging, right? I mean, it is how you get the word there. So you have to do it well, and it needs to be good messaging and thoughtful, and it needs to be, again, looking at who you're sending it to and does it make sense. But I also think when somebody gets a message from me and they live in Perth and they see that I'm from Boston, I don't think that they're going to be like, why is this girl messaging me? Right? Like I literally live on the other side of the world. Like there's no other way for me to like make contact with you. Right?
No, I agree. I just was curious just because I've had lots of Monet people message me, and I'm like, I feel like my profile is pretty obvious that I am an activewear person. I love leggings, but it's like not. So I was just trying to figure out how best to do it.
Well, and that's somebody who's not looking.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody that's not actually taking more than like 14 seconds to fire off like 50 messages, right?
Yeah.
And that's
I think that was like made me question it. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what's happening is people are doing kind of the opposite of what I'm saying, right? That I think should be sort of like our standard of practice that we should do when it comes to cold messaging, is that people are just sort of like, they're like, oh, hashtag Australia. Oh, great. She's in Australia. Oh, great. Whatever. Like they're not taking the 3 seconds to look at your thing and be like, oh, but she has, you know, Ontario tagged in 15 posts, right? Or wherever. So, but I use hashtags to start with for my messaging. And then the way that I message is I think of it as like following breadcrumbs. So I start at one place and then I keep going. And so what that looks like is I will start at like either a hashtag or some sort of fitness thing or whatever. And then I will find like somebody who has like 4,000 followers, right? And they have like a good account and they look like they're pretty active and whatever. And then I will click on their follower list. And then I will message people from there. And then I'll find somebody else in that list that looks good and makes sense, whatever. And then I'll go into their follower list. And I do this kind of like, and there are days where it's like, I feel like I have like 100 different people that I could like follow from this trail. And then there's other days where I feel like it has like 2 people and then I keep running out and then I sort of like put it aside. So it really is, I sort of follow this little kind of thread around. And by doing so, it feels like I have more ability to sort of tap in and sort of like touch different things, right? Because the next thing you know, I started over here with like a hashtag about like, you know, yoga or something. And I've ended up over here where I'm like messaging people that are like hairstylists or something, right? It's like, and it's kind of weird how like you get there, but I find personally for me that that's the easiest way to sort of do it, and keeps it so that again, I have to sort of do the work to be like, who are you? Do you look, does this make sense? Like, you know, whatever, and then kind of follow that around until I feel like I sent out enough messages. And sometimes I send out 5 and sometimes I send out 50 doing this little thing, but that's how I message all 3 of the countries. Is that's the kind of the process that I use.
Do you recommend adding the people that have interest to your VIP group so they get a better idea of what it is?
I mean, if they're, yes.
Because like my
interested.
sister-in-law is Canadian and she's living in Australia. Well, she's actually stuck there, but she's made a lot of friends while traveling. So she said like she wants to see like how I would do a party. Therefore, like she would sign up as like a Canadian rep, but she would do her parties in Australia. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. And then I have other people like from our wedding that are from Australia too, that have shown like interest in like even just having a party and getting it out there. So
Yes.
I was just
Yes.
wondering like if I should add them to my group, even though like everything's kind of all over the place for them with the time difference. But
Yeah, I think you just say like, I would love for you to be able to see this. Keep in mind, like, I don't know if you do, you know, both countries inside of your VIP group, whatever, but, you know, put that disclaimer and be like, hey, like, you know, currently, obviously we don't have the Australian catalog, you know, open. And when it opens, again, I think being super transparent with people, we will not launch with like the same number right there that we have available in the other 2 countries.
yeah,
And in
because even
some
like
ways,
our launches, I think are gonna, like you said, they're probably gonna be different in different days.
yeah, so what they have said is what they're pretty sure is that not only will it technically be a different day, but what they'll do is they'll take like, for example, the like black pocket light and tight stripes or whatever, something like that, that we have all seen like a million times, that they will launch for the first time for Australia, that will either be like a restock for us or just something that like, we're like, okay, we're good. We've seen that like 6 times already, right?
Yeah.
So that, but it'll be like new to Australia, right?
Hmm.
So the nice thing is that likely what will happen is the people that are in your group now will be able to see things ahead of time and be like, oh, those are super cute, or love that style, or whatever it is. And it builds a sense of like excitement and momentum and whatever, having been able to see sort of, okay, this is what this looks like. We launch things every week. We have frequent restocks, and kind of what that model sort of looks like. And then just knowing like things are going to be a little different for you all when you launch. The price point though, I think is going to be very close to what the Canadian one is, because it sounds like the exchange rate is somewhat similar, at least currently, between from us to you and from us to them, I think is going to be like pretty close. So I think that gives them a good touch point. And then it's just kind of like, you know, it's a good way for people to be like, oh, this is fun and exciting, and, you know, whatever it is, and start getting.
Because I might even mail her some, like a pair of light and tights and a bomber bra, just so she has like something to show. So
Oh, for sure.
it might cost me $1 million, but
yeah, for sure. No, I absolutely. I mean, I think any opportunity that you can get more exposure, right? And you can get some product in people's hands and all of that is worth it. And especially for a situation like this, where it's not just some like random person that you're like, well, hope they like, you know, like it and do something with it. Like you have a very specific, I'm sending this, you know, for a very specific reason. You can be very thoughtful about what it is that you're sending over there. The return that you're going to see from that is only going to be upside, right? Because you know where it's going, you know who's getting it. And the ability to then have people, ooh, what is this? And get excited about, and all that is huge. So yeah, I think for sure anytime you can get people in your VIP group, regardless, I think is always a good thing, because even if they're not going to purchase, you know, tomorrow or a month from now or whatever, having people with their eyes on you is always good.
I just had a question, because I have, like, I'm Canadian and I have a lot of American clientele and they're both in my VIP, but I find sometimes it can get confusing with restocks and launches, because it's like 1 o'clock, okay, but this is for US only, okay, 2:30, now it's for Canada. So my question is, like, I have a lot of friends in Australia. I lived there for a year, so I do have some natural connections. I have one friend that loves ZYIA so much. She's never even like seen it in person, but she was like, I want to order a bunch of stuff and can I ship it? And I'm like, girl, like that's going to cost a lot of money, but she's super excited about it coming to Australia. So my question is, are you guys doing an Australia VIP page eventually, like a separate one, or are you going to kind of combine the three? Or do some of you guys just cater Canadian and American, like as it is? And like, how will you guys decipher how you're going to do this?
Everybody have.
That's a good question. I haven't run into that problem yet because I don't have a single US like customer yet. So mine's solely been Canada. So I've never ran into that problem. But I feel like if you open multiple VIPs, that also is like a lot on your plate. So I don't know what that could look like. I'm stumped as much as you.
You know what I do in my page? I don't do VIPs, a VIP page. I just do the business shop page. So it's public, but I do Canada and the US. Canada, obviously, I'm Canadian. I'm a lot stronger Canadian wise than I am US. But what I do is I have it pinned at the top of my page as an announcement, and it's just like a how to shop. So it's a photo of me. It's a photo of my link tree. Like I use link tree, so it's just easy. Canadians click here, US click here, and it's got everything kind of laid out, and I pin it to the top of my page. So I don't ever change out those links. It is just my shop link. There's no event link. Like I can move my shop orders around as I want, but I never change those links. So all I will do now is just I'll add Australia in once we get there, and I'll keep everybody in one page just because I want to be public and I want that one page to be like that's my spot. I personally, I don't post the restocks. If I have something that's coming up, like the boyfriend collection, I'll just do a post and I'll take, you know, a pre-order, and ladies who want restocks, they know where the link is and they know just kind of to follow. I mean, some people probably miss out, but I don't do the restocks. Like I don't post those graphics to my pages. So that's what I do. So I'm just going to add Australia in, and I'm going to just hope that it's going to work. But I do use Linktree. I got that from Erin. And so I've got all my links in one spot. Click here, it's just the link tree. And then you can go in, if you're Canadian, it's all well detailed out, and I just pin it to the top of my page. So that's what I'm planning on doing. That's a good question. I haven't even thought that far, but now that you've said it, that's what I'm going to do.
And how, like, Mallory, how did you branch out to, like, okay, you said you're mostly Canadian market, but like, how did you branch out? Like, do you have US clientele as well? Or like,
I do. You know what? I do. Starting ZYIA, like I've got a sister-in-law who's in the States, but she was in Canada. We had done a party. I didn't have any connections whatsoever. So just through networking on Facebook, and I'm a lot stronger on Facebook than I am on Instagram. So I join groups. So like I'm obviously a mom and like really into the thick of things, toddler, baby. So I join a lot of mom groups on Facebook, a lot of, like I was a fitness trainer and nutritionist. So I'll join those types of groups and I just network. I just comment. Sometimes it's a slow process, but I network. I share the opportunity. I connect with moms from all over the place. And if I can sync them into my shop page, sync them into a party. And I do have American reps as well. So I mean, it was a process, and it's still slow. Like I said, obviously my Canadian market is way bigger than my American, but that's where I find is just cool. Joining groups and just kind of whatever your target market or your niche is, your hobbies, and kind of do it that way.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, at some point, our website is going to encompass all of the things, right? It will be in one place for all the countries, which will make things easier, hopefully more streamlined. And that is obviously a long process that's been in the works for a long time, but is still very much in the works. So I think that will make it a big difference. I agree, the Linktree. So I love Linktree is great. The other service that I really like is, and I had sort of put it aside, but I started kind of playing around with it again, is it's a free app called Milkshake. And it's another way that you can, like, it's hard to see. Sorry. Try to make it darker so that you can actually like see it, but you might not be able to. So it has basically a bunch of layouts. Yeah, you can't see that at all. It has a bunch of layout options. It's a free service and you can build links into it. So it basically, I know, it's like so bright you like can't see, but it basically makes it's like a mini website almost. It's very custom looking. You can change colors and fonts and add pictures and all these different things. And then you can paste it into your bio as your like website, basically, right? So in Facebook and in Instagram. So Linktree has kind of like, basically a tree of links, right? Because you can have all these different things to click on. And this is the same idea. Milkshake is just a little bit more like kind of like artsy and creative looking, I think. I have the paid version of Linktree, which is like $4 a month or something. It's not very expensive, and you can add photos and things like that to make it a little more custom looking. Oh, Cassie just saved a link to her, just posted in the chat a link to her Milkshake, so you can see what one looks like. So that's a great, again, if you're looking for a way to have lots of things housed in one place. And that the way that Cassie just shared that as well, you share it as like a website, basically. So, that's the kind of thing that you could do a post and like, that could be your link. Let me pull up the chat so I can see you guys. Yeah, the app is called My Milkshake. Is that what it's called? Such a terrible name. I don't know.
I think just Milkshake.
Just Milkshake. I don't know who came up with that. Yeah, just Milkshake. Anyway, it's great. It's really easy to use. I'm not super tech savvy, and it's great. So that's the kind of thing, if you're looking for something where you can have, lots of different, all of the different countries and things like that, until we're like combined into one. As far as like, posting and sharing things and stuff like that, I think, again, a lot of that is going to just depend on kind of what it looks like when we launch, and when we have more sort of like knowledge about what the day-to-day kind of thing is going to look like, as far as what their catalog looks like and their price points, and when they are getting launches and restocks and all of those kinds of things. I think a lot of that will sort of unfold, and it'll be easier to make plans once we kind of have more like working knowledge, I think. What else?
Maurice, it's just like a white app symbol, and then milk is on the top and shake is on the bottom, and it's upside down. If that's like, if you're trying to find the app, that's what it looks like in the app store.
Yeah, it's like a pink.
Yeah, it's like a whitey pink, white background with like a pinky red writing, and it says milk on the top and then shake on the bottom.
Shake is upside down. Yeah, that should be it. Yep, that's it. What else? What else are people doing, or questions, or strategy, or?
I have a question. Do you know exactly when it's gonna launch? Like next year, a few months? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. I know nothing more than you guys do about that. trying to read through the lines and like kind of knowing, I guess at this point, when Zach says things in the way that he says them and sort of like interpreting through that. My guess is that the goal was for it to be open before the close of 21. Like, I think that was the goal. And I think that was the sort of target. Whether or not that's going to happen, I think is a totally different story. It sounds like there are a lot of parts of Australia that are opening up a little bit again after having been like fully locked down. So I'm hopeful that that means that they're going to have the ability to start kind of like getting into some sense of, you know, timelines and things like that. I think having listened to kind of what they do know currently, which is that they have kind of a plan for when customer service will be working, and they've talked about, you know, kind of where the warehouse will be and things like that. And they have the product ready, right? Which that to me is why I think that 21 was like the end of 21 was the goal, right? Because if they have all the products sitting there ready, then that this has been in the works for a while, right? Because we know how long it takes to kind of get stuff, especially how long it's taken this year to get stuff. So he has said multiple times, like their goal is before the end of the year. But whether that actually happens, I think it's hard to say.
I think the best way to plan is like plan like it's launching tomorrow. And then if it doesn't, then you're ready and you're just even more like have more connections and more like things under your belt. So plan like it's going to launch like tomorrow, surprise email, guess what? And then when it happens and you're just ready for it, I think that's the best way.
And it probably will be like that. I will say Canada was like that as well.
Yeah.
It was this long period of time where it was coming. And then literally 1 week, it was like, oh, we're opening next week. And it was like that. So I will say, as much as we kind of know things in advance, there are equally as many things that we're like, oh, really? Okay. And this may be one of those. And Canada 100% was like that, where it was literally like this slow, long delay. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, we're opening, and like, here's the package, and like, here's the discount that it's going to be, and here's the reps, and and it was like, oh, okay, today's the day, right? So this will probably be like that. I anticipate that there will be some sort of special offer for joining. With almost 100% certainty, there will be some launch thing the same way that you guys had. And I think you can feel like fairly comfortable telling people that as well. I would be literally like, I mean, I've been wrong before, but I would be shocked if we don't launch with some sort of enrollment incentive package, discounted price, whatever it is, the same way that you guys had. And again, I could be wrong, but I'd be very surprised if we don't do that. So I think that's also a good reason to have people sort of like in the wings, so that if it's only a week or whatever it is, that you can be like, hey, we're opening, here's the date, you're gonna get your website, here's what's happening, and there's gonna be the special offer, promo to join, if you join the first week, blah, 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 all those things. So I'm guessing that this will be the same as well. So all the more reason to have everything sort of like up and ready, you know, as much as you can, so that when it's go time, you're not feeling like you're scrambling around with that, I think. What else? Are you guys like, when you're messaging with people, do you feel like are people interested? Like, are you getting, or are you getting like certain questions that you're like, I don't know how to answer that? Or like, are you getting feedback that you feel like you need help with, or anything along those lines?
I haven't cold messaged a lot of strangers per se, but the few I have, I find that they're not even writing me back. I'm just writing my blurb, and So I don't know, maybe I have to work on my cold messaging because I think I just scare them away. They're like, oh, and I'm not doing the cheesy, hey girl, because I hate that. But sometimes I guess even like the nicest person with the best intentions can come across the wrong way.
I mean, I can tell you what I use, and I mix it up a little bit. Always have with all of my cold messaging, depending on kind of like, there's just times where I've been like, I don't really think that one's like hitting with anybody. So my current one that I feel decently good about is, I always say like, hi, whomever, right? I always say their name. And then I'm like, hi, like my name is Erin. I'm partnered with an online activewear brand that I helped launch in the US and Canada. I actually personally live outside Boston. We are launching in Australia next. Lots of exclamation points all over the place. I would love to connect with you and share more about our brand and plans to launch with founding women there. More exclamation points. I am obsessed with our line of premium activewear, and building a global business is a dream come true that I can't wait to share there as well. Hope to chat soon. That's it. So obviously, like, being succinct is important, right? And again, like, if you see something that you can connect with them on, even better, right? So if you want to take the time to be like, hey, like, I saw that you're a coach with Beachbody, I am as well. Or, hey, like, I saw that you love CrossFit, that's what I do, or right, whatever that is, to take the time to actually like connect on those levels is, I think, even better, right? If you can do that. This is what I'm doing currently. And like I said, for the most part with this one, people have either they've either seen it, not said anything and followed me, or I've had more people in Australia respond with, hey, yeah, I'm interested, like, what's the brand? Or I've had more like follow-up interest from that than I have from using a very similar message inside the US and Canada, right? For whatever it's worth. And, again, and then people have been like, oh, and so I'll be like, oh, here's a little bit about us, and kind of tell them a little about the brand, and, ask them if they want to take a look at the American site just to get, a feeling for like what our stuff looks like. And that, it's not like I'm sitting around with like 50 people being like, okay, I'm ready to join now, right? Like, it hasn't transitioned into that necessarily, but it has been where people are like, oh yeah, let me like take a look at this and see, what it is or whatever, and have shown interest at least from that message, which I take that as like a win, right? That feels to me like I've at least like made some impact. Now, whether or not it turns into anything, maybe they're customers, maybe they could care less by the time we launch, whatever it is, but that's at least set like a building block, I think. Should we have a second Insta account? You definitely do not have to have a second Instagram account. I did a second one, knowing that my primary one will continue to be my primary one, and the vast majority of my effort and action goes into that. But I did go ahead and create one, only from the sense that I'm at the point where I have enough followers and I follow enough people in my main account that it starts to get kind of wonky to sort of like go then follow a whole bunch of like Australian accounts too. So my Australian one is just going to be Australia. And then I think knowing also just that because the launches are going to be like potentially different days, different products, all those kinds of things, I felt like for that one specifically, for me in my head and the way that I kind of organize my business, I felt like it made more sense to have a separate one. Definitely don't have to do that. It's definitely more work. And it does sort of like splice up your followers and things like that too. So
Erin, I've been trying to follow like Instagram people that like give you, and they recommended to use your personal account, because people that are going to genuinely buy from you want to see you as a person too. So they recommended because I originally started like a second one too, that was like sparkle and shine, like Cassie's Clothing Closet. And my following grew quickly, but I ended up still getting more customers and sales from my personal one because they wanted to see me. So I agree with you that starting an Australian one might be good because of like, it's so far away on the other side of the world. But if you can't manage it, I don't recommend you starting a second one because it's a lot of work, and you can get the followers from Australia with Instagram so much easier than Facebook. Like you can connect with people all around the world way easier with Instagram than you can with Facebook. So Instagram can be your tool to bring Australia in, and then you can guide them to Facebook after.
For sure. And I guess the caveat too would be that because I do so much of my own content, my photos and all of those things, I have an enormous amount of content to use that is photos of me and whatever, right? So my Australia page is, basically an offshoot of my personal, or of my, I guess it's not really, it's still my business page, but it's the one that I use most often, right? So anything with Instagram, obviously, like content over there is very important, right? How you post things, when you post things, having creativity, having uniqueness, all of those things are very important. And whether you have one account or 15 accounts, Instagram is a very time consuming hobby. So having stuff that I've already done for one and being able to sort of shift it around or post it at different times or use different, wording and things like that is helpful, right? To kind of like reduce work, but it's a lot to maintain, which is, I feel the same way about having like multiple business pages or multiple VIP groups or things like that. It's just like, that's going to be overwhelming. And again, with the goal that eventually we'll all be under one blanket, right? And we'll all be one kind of like global site. I think even more so, right? That we will be like a global brand. And while it feels a little disjointed right now because we have all of these sites, when those all come together, I think it will feel a little bit more organic to just be one.
Erin, just to go back on the thing where they asked about the VIP group and having different groups for it. So I did live in the States for 6 years. So I obviously have a big US customer base and also Canadian. And what I do is I'm not very active in my business page, but in my VIP group, I do make use of the scheduler and SendShare. So obviously with the US launching first older products, just to go back on new releases, I would post those. And then usually what I would do is just take the video of the launch and schedule it 5 minutes before we launch in Canada. So I think when we do launch in Australia and we want to keep it in one group, it's definitely going to be important to make use of some kind of scheduler because of the time difference for sure.
Yeah, I think that's great.
You're not getting up at 5 a.m. to post new releases?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, my sales business is 99% US based, right? So my group is also 99% of that. And that's where I kind of like land. And I think the other thing to think about also, in this sort of ties into kind of like the situation that we face today, is social media is great, right? And it's a huge tool and it's such a huge benefit, but simple things like email marketing campaigns and like that stuff is still very powerful and it's very impactful. And in some ways, like, and again, if you start having customers that are, in all of these different countries and all these whatever, at some point using just like a simple, emailer, right, that you can plan out ahead of time and just sort of sub in the new information and, reuse the same templates and things like that over and over again, like there becomes a lot of value in that also. So I think that's another thing to like keep in mind. Again, if you're trying to hit, all these different people in all these different places, different time zones and things like that, is that there may be some value in having different ways that you message with people, right? What else? You guys have other, it's been about an hour, so I'm gonna wrap up pretty soon, but do you guys have other questions, things that you want to talk about? Ideas, ways
Sorry,
that you wanna-
one last thing. Your
Yeah.
Discover ZYIA Australia group that you started. Are we as ZYIA Bells allowed to invite our peeps there and we introduce them, or we just kind of invite them?
You do whatever you want. You can introduce,
Okay.
you can just invite. That page needs more content, and in the daily, like whatever of all of the things that are going on, that one keeps getting pushed. Like it does for me personally. But it very much could use some more content in it to make it of value. So it is on.
If you add me as an admin, I don't mind doing that once in a while for sure.
Yeah, I think I think like, again, like having, going live and, doing those things in that group are really important. And I also think that once we have a little bit more kind of like information, I work best under pressure. So when that is the one thing that I think when we have a little more time pressure, that I'll be like, okay, gotta like actually crank some stuff out for this, right? Because like people need to know what's happening. But yeah, that group is open and like you're welcome to invite people into it. I mean, I also think inviting people into like the VIP group is a really smart play as well. For people that show some interest to be like, hey, like just if you want to come see sort of like what it's like and whatever kind of how we do things. And I haven't had anybody yet that I feel like is so interested that I'm like, oh, come in, like join my group or whatever. But I think if you get to a point in a conversation where somebody's really like showing that level of interest, I think that's a great time to be like, hey, I'd love for you to just like follow along while we're waiting for launch to happen. You can see everything. Like, I think that would be, of all of the things where you'll probably get more impact, people will get to know you personally better and also the brand in your VIP group, right? They just will have more connection, I think, than anywhere else. So I think that's a great idea. Anything else? Okay, so I think that once we have some more information, we should hop on and do this again. I think for now, I think we're sort of still operating under a little bit of a vacuum, which is like, we know what's happening. We don't know when, kind of know where the warehouse is going to be. That's kind of it. We don't have a whole lot else to really work with, right? So I think until we have more information, I think the goal should be to continue to do what it is that everybody's doing, right? Which is like making connections and reaching out and trying to like build those foundations and those relationships. That's kind of really all that we can do, right? Once we get some more information where we know it's a couple weeks out, or we know, here's what the launches are going to look like, or here's the timeline, or whatever it is, then I think we sort of regroup again and, kind of like touch base and see again, sort of what kind of feedback you're getting, what kind of questions you're getting, what people are finding as far as like interest level and, all of those types of things. And we can kind of collaborate again with some more working knowledge beyond this is happening and we're excited, right? Which is kind of where we're currently at. But what I will say, of all of these things, doing this work now, even though it may feel a little bit like you're kind of operating in a vacuum of information and sort of in the dark, I promise you it will benefit you, like, and your business in a huge, 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 huge way. And that's my biggest takeaway that I learned from the Canadian launch. And it was totally in retrospect, right? That the opportunity to be able to help launch the brand in a new country is like limitless potential, truly. Okay. And it doesn't take 100 people. It doesn't take, 50 people. It can take just a handful of really motivated, really strong workers that can build an enormously successful brand and have your team have tremendous success from that. So even at times when you're kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know why I'm doing this, just remember, it has huge potential for you. And yes, absolutely a Zoom with Australia prospects before the launch when we have more information, 100%. And probably more than one, I think. The thing that we will have to figure out is the timing of that. Because even when I was looking up, so I'm Eastern Standard, obviously, but within Australia, the like time zone difference from here to people that I've been talking to is like 12 hours, 15 hours. Like it's not just like, it's even within Australia, there's like a huge difference there too, if that makes sense, right? I mean, which again, it's a large country, right? Same way as we are here. But I was like messaging with someone and it was weird when they were like responding. So what I found is that people seem to be at like 6 a.m. here, like Eastern Standard, when I'm messaging people. When I first wake up, I tend to like, I'll do it then, or I'll do it at night, like kind of right before I go to bed. Like those are my two like sandwich times that I tend to dedicate time to messaging. And people seem to be awake a lot of times where I'll get like pretty instantaneous messages. But yeah, I think that having prospect calls is super, super beneficial. So whether it's, early in the morning or late at night, like I'm happy to lead those. What I will say about a prospect call is it has to be collaborative. So it cannot be just me talking. That's my only caveat to a prospect call is people don't want to just hear me, right? They just don't. My perspective is my own perspective. I live in a vacuum, right, of my own, kind of creation. And while I am very knowledgeable about our business and where it has come from and where I think it's going and all of those things, people want to hear from lots of other people and their experiences and why they love this business, what it has meant for them, what the opportunity has meant for them, what they think it could mean for others, all of those things, right? So that's the only thing that I think is most important, is that when we do them, people have got to show up, right? There's power in numbers. So having like 4 people on which having a small call sometimes is nice because it can be focused, but there's also power in numbers, right? So if somebody gets on a call and there's, 50 people and they're like, oh, wow, people are like really into this. This is exciting. They're really excited. They seem really excited about what's happening. There's all these other prospects. That's human nature, right? Like that's how this works. And so those are kind of my caveats to it. I think they're great. I think they're super helpful. And I'm like more than happy to like organize them, facilitate them, and be kind of like the moderator and all of those things. But like you pretty ladies are going to have to speak up and jump in and share from like your perspectives and things that you want people to know about also, right? Because you're going to say something that has either impacted you from this business or from this experience or from this opportunity for you or your family or whatever it is that's unique to you, that's going to speak to somebody, right? And my perspective and what I've taken from this may be completely different. So the power in having a really large team, which we do, is being able to have all of those different inputs and all of that perspective. So I think that's really, really, really important personally. But yes, I think once we know like a launch plan, I think is when we should do that. So ideally like when we have a date, or when we have like a really strong indication that like it's like a month out or something like that. And again, we can do more than one also. But yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more working knowledge about, kind of what the launch plans are going to look like, price points, what they're going to start with. They have said Australia's catalog will be larger than Canada's was when it launched. Fingers crossed. So I think we know that, but I think we just need more information, right? So, yes, absolutely. What else? And I don't know if you guys have heard this also, but if you have prospects that are people that are, I wouldn't do this for just anybody, but if you have prospects that are high potential, high yield prospects that you think are people that have the ability to be very large business builders or very impactful or whatever it is, and they have questions, Zach has been having conference calls with people for weeks now. I don't know who these people are, and I don't know where everybody found them, but I do know that he has been hopping on and doing calls, like prospect calls with Australians, that he has been connected to. So if you are in a situation where you're like, gosh, like this person could really like kill it, and I would love for them to have information now and just really, be ready to go and all those things, connect him, because he's 100% willing to do that. And he's been doing it for people. So absolutely.
Send him an email, Erin.
Yeah. He's currently with Brenda in the Maldives.
I know, I saw that. I know.
They're out of town for a couple weeks. But yeah, no, when we were in Cancun, we had dinner one night and Brenda and him were at our table. And yeah, he's been like, there's people that he's been talking to already, a whole bunch about all of this. So again, like I'm saying, I wouldn't do that for just like any casual person, but if there's somebody that you identify that's interested, that's like has high potential, and they seem to need or want, what I'm thinking of likely are other people that are in direct sales, right? That have had a lot of experience, that may potentially have a lot of like, sort of more pointed conversations about, the business and things like that, right? He definitely will do that. So, but yeah, just send him an email and say, hey, like I have this person, they would love to like, hop on the phone with you for 20 or 30 minutes and, whatever it is. So he'll do it. Okay. Real quick before we get off, we have all these promos that are happening this month for rank advancement and the leadership luncheon invite thing that's happening. As always, what I have found personally in the last few months that is working best is for training and mentoring is really doing one-on-one calls for me personally. So my repertoire is open to anyone on your teams that is going for these promotions that feels like they need, again, a fresh perspective or, someone to chat through things with or whatever. I don't have all the answers, but sometimes having just somebody new to kind of like chat through is helpful. So for your teams and people that are interested in whatever, again, I am open. People are welcome to message me. If they want to set up something, any of you guys as well, obviously, I'm happy to do that. And I've been doing them like 30-minute Zooms, just kind of one-on-one quickie things, but especially knowing that we have some of these big kind of like promos happening for people to rank advance. Those are designed for people that are kind of launching their business, which is a time when mentorship is like really important, obviously, and can make a big difference in somebody's business as they're launching it, or potentially like going for something like director, senior director, which as we all know is like a really big leap to make. So anyway, please know that my door is open for that. And, but for your teams as well, that it's for any level that's in our downline. So people are welcome to reach out if they need stuff. And also if you guys think a call would be helpful, designed around any of those, let me know also, because we can do that too. Okay. All right, friends, it was so good to see all of you guys, and I hope everyone has a good week. And I will post this. It's recorded, so once it uploads and everything, I'll get it posted so everyone has access to it too. Okay, good night. You guys have a good night.